Hello and welcome to the Look Forward podcast, powered by the S&P Global Institute, the platform for enterprise thought leadership across S&P Global. I'm Aries Poon. I'm leading the analysis team for Asia Pacific and Latin America in the Market Intelligence division, and I will be your host today. Markets are moving faster, risks are shifting, and decision makers need foresight. In this podcast, we bring you expert perspectives from across S&P Global on the macroeconomic, market, energy, and technology forces shaping what comes next and helping you navigate uncertainty and look forward with confidence. Today, we are looking at India at a moment of significant global disruption. The ongoing Middle East conflict has triggered energy shocks, supply disruptions, and financial volatility, but also forced India to rethink how it manages risk, growth, and long-term strategy. To help unpack all of that, I'm joined by two colleagues today, Deepa Kumar from the Market Intelligence Division and Gauri Jauhar from the Energy Division. Deepa and Gauri, great to have you. To start, Deepa, how significant is the current shock for India, and how does it compare to previous external crises?
Thanks for your question, Aries. And of course, the context of this question is very much there in the fourth edition of India Forward that we released in May, which is India Forward Strategic Imperatives. The whole edition, in fact, was around this question is what kind of a stress test is the Middle East war for India? And it's actually a pretty rounded, it's a pretty holistic sort of shock for India. It's the most so to speak, important shock that we've noticed within India since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. There are multiple transmission channels for India that have come through. First is, of course, its dependence on the Middle East, the fact that it is dependent on a particular region where the war is happening for energy sources. More than 50% of energy sources, Gauri will dive into that much, I'm sure. Even investments, the Middle East has become a bigger trade and investment partner for India in recent years. And of course, even remittances, which forms an important part, almost 3.5% of Indian GDP, of which a very big concentration is from the Gulf. So there are these multiple layers at which the Middle East war is starting to show in for India. Some of the supply disruption also that we're seeing, right? Like it's not just oil and gas, but it's also fertilizers on which India is dependent from the Middle East. And then there is this kind of like wider question of what does the Middle East war also stress test in terms of India's geopolitical posture. So a lot of the countries that are claimants in this war, India is trying to be friends or trying to show that it has strategic partnerships with all of them. So in terms of the quote unquote balancing act of Indian foreign policy that everyone looks at, which is, the strategic autonomy question or the multi-alignment question, this is really a test even of that. How is it different from the previous crisis? And I'll stop here quickly, and Gauri, maybe you should weigh in as well. As is it's a lot more multi-sectoral, and it's not just about supply. It's also about prices. It's also about the financial risk. It's also about the macroeconomic risk. If you look at the global financial crisis, little isolated. It was just about that. If you look at COVID, it was widely much more global. So it's not just about how countries are exposed themselves or not. And lastly, of course, India itself has become much more integrated into the global economy now than it was, say, even a few years ago. So the transmission channels are really showing, and that's what we're trying to track in the India Forward Journal and going forward. Gauri, quickly over to you. I will.
Yeah, absolutely, Deepa. I think what you talked about, this being the transmission coming through many layers, is so apt because when we look at this is truly an unprecedented crisis. Because if you go back in history, 53 years back in 1973 oil embargo, it was about 8% of global oil supply that was disrupted. But when we look at the situation today, it is about 16% of global oil supplies have been impacted. And the customers who are impacted are more towards Asia. And of course, India becomes very central in that. And uh, the Middle Eastern hydrocarbon molecule, as we argue with my other co-authors, Pulkit Agarwal, Dr. Atul Arya, and Dr. Rajiv Lala and Vedant Patil, is that the Middle East hydrocarbon molecule is often the most economically efficient molecule because of shipping distances, which has been embedded into the Indian energy system. So what we see is that whether you look at oil, whether you look at LNG, there has been a significant dependence of about, at least 45 to 50% of India's oil imports, for instance, and a significantly greater amount of the LNG imports coming in of almost 60 odd percent. So, and a lot of these are based on long-term contracts, and they also shoulder India's base oil demand. So when you look at sectors like transport, sectors where LPG is significant in the Indian economy, for in terms of residential consumers, India still remains an oil economy, despite all the progress that we have made, in our shift from fossil fuels in the power system. The transport system still, notwithstanding all the advances in EVs, still rests, especially when you look at long haul trucking, diesel demand. It is all based really on oil. So I think that is where this crisis is very different. The search for alternatives is very real. The search, the hawk-like look at uh, what is happening on storage levels is a daily question now, because of this crisis. This has never happened before.
And actually, despite the emerging stress, India has always been seen as a relatively resilient economy. So, Deepa, what is holding up and where are the cracks starting to show?
And that's a good sort of segue point, right, Aries? Because especially like we had two shocks recently. One was COVID, and the second was Russia's invasion of Ukraine. India came through as the world's fastest growing major economy through all those periods, and that still continues. So it is still riding some tailwinds of how its growth is structured from some of these previous shocks and how from how economic policy has been tailored. And there are a couple of points there. One is, for better or for worse, the government is a huge driver of growth. So, be it in terms of how the government is supporting with an economic stabilization fund right now, how the government has increased its sort of proportion of fuel and fertilizer subsidies, and also how the government is continuing to support infrastructure spending in India. So, one is that is kind of continuing, and that is a buffer. And the second is we've seen that in the private sector, firms are being able to absorb the costs right now. We're not seeing, of course, this is not to say that they may not pass through eventually, and that is the second half of the question that we're coming to, right, which is what are the challenges. But those two things are still working out, that like firms are able to absorb the costs. We've not yet seen them buckle because of it. And the second is the way India's economic model has been in the recent few years is the government has always been proactively involved in driving this growth story, and is still very much present. Like, in fact, they've stepped in quite proactively as soon as the crisis started. Coming to the other side of where things are buckling, and this is where the fact that it's a global conflict, or the fact that it has so many other transmission channels, right? You can't control everything from like simply having some of these domestic interventions. The biggest is, of course, the rupee. The rupee has fallen by more than 6% since the start of this conflict. And as we highlighted in the paper, which is of course May, and we'll have to see how we update that going forward, we're expecting the rupee to at best go and settle somewhere at 93 versus the US dollar by 2027. So it's still moved from the baseline. So we are saying that there's almost no going back in terms of where the rupee was before the conflict. And that does show through in some of our other indicators in terms of inflation, which, even because of low base effects of 2025, is likely going towards a 5.1% number from a 2% number, which is a significant drag on prices. And there are these other factors of how India is expected to have a weak monsoon because of El Nino. And that then goes and has sort of an impact on the agricultural production, which is again, it's an important driver of the Indian economy. So these are some of the places where we're seeing growth feel some strain. It might show up again in how demand gets constrained, because once supply side issues have started, demand constraint does start. And so this year, this fiscal that just got over, fiscal 2025, India's growth has still been stable, 7.7%, and that's primarily a driver of the previous quarters. But the next year, which is fiscal year 2026, we do think India's GDP growth falls sharply to 5.7%.
And in fact, behind the resilience of growth is we're also seeing the policy responses evolving. So, Deepa, how is India shifting from short-term stabilization to longer-term strategy?
And this is something, Aries, I've been saying this since the start of and Gauri must have heard me speak on this even with a few of the clients that we met in May in Delhi, right? Is we're talking about India looking at this as not just preparing for the current crisis, but also keeping an eye on the next crisis. Because that is just the nature of the way global conflict is evolving. That's the nature of the way global trade policy is evolving. That's the nature of the uncertainty that has come in with emerging technologies like AI, how you navigate those things, and what is the impact of that on the economy, energy, so on and so forth. So we're definitely seeing that India is now looking at it not just from just a short term perspective, but also a medium term and long term perspective. One thing very briefly, and that is, of course, Gauri's domain, but that India does realize is its energy dependence is a big sort of headwind for it. And the energy dependence is not just about what you can or cannot produce domestically, but who your suppliers are. So, to Gauri's point, right, like the fact that India has a major gas dependence, especially only on the Gulf, over 90% of it comes from the Gulf. We're seeing that one of the long term strategies that India is playing is really diversifying its contracts. So it's looking at some of these contracts coming from not just the Gulf anymore, but also regions like Australia, from the US itself, which is part of the India-US trade negotiations, and from other parts of the world. So those that kind of supplier diversification is exceedingly important for India. India is not alone in doing it, but one of the things that India is doing is ensuring that its supplier sort of rota is very robust and does not necessarily look like what it's looking like. And there are a couple of other players where India is careful of this as well, China and the US both being involved. The other is the storage, is again something technically speaking, Gauri would be much better and much more adept at speaking about that. But they now do think, and we say that in the third paper, which is Gauri's paper, that like you need a national storage policy, energy storage policy. We do see that there are expedited regulatory efforts for building up those storage capacity, for ensuring that there are strategic reserves engagements done, like Prime Minister Modi's visit to the UAE just last month. And we're also seeing the other parts of the infrastructure, like hastening up India's ports production, ports infrastructure production, hastening up the shipbuilding yards. We are seeing regulatory changes that point to not something that India is hoping to scale and achieve in the next 1 year or 2 years. But if you stick with this policy through different political changes that are likely coming in the 2 to 3 years, it is about reorienting that medium to long term strategy now.
So let's take a deeper look at the energy because it is clearly sitting at the center of the story. And let's turn to Gauri for a moment. So how has the shock in energy markets exposed structural vulnerabilities in India's system?
Right. So the structural vulnerability, Aries, really stems from the dependence on the Middle East, wherein, as I'd said before, the Middle East molecule is embedded, and is the most economically efficient source of imported energy in India. So again, going back to the numbers, approximately 60% of crude oil and LNG imports and approximately 85% of LPG imports all come from the Straits. So, and by 2030, something we've shared in the paper also is that India will face an import dependency of 94% for crude oil and about 65% for natural gas. So the vulnerability again is linked to that overarching geographical dependence because of proximity, because of the routes, shipping routes, and also long-term contracts. I think where we see the hope to out of this is that as India's economic might rises, even though as Deepa shared earlier, there would be because of the crisis a moderation in the growth as per we had shared earlier in terms of our GDP forecast, but the cost of supply disruption will also increase. So this will put a whole series of, so it'll be like a domino effect that every sector within energy is a large value chain. If you go if you look at the upstream, the downstream, the midstream, and then you look at the whole power system as its own system. When you look at all these systems, there are changes that need to happen in each of these systems to cushion any long-term, near-term and long-term impacts. And as Deepa had said earlier, to make sure that we have a better baseline, we are better prepared for the next crisis, wherever and however it may happen. Because as we're seeing, the world is buffeted a lot more by what we call the black swans. We're just seeing them with too much frequency for different sets of triggers.
So, Gauri, if diversification alone isn't enough, what does a more resilient energy strategy actually look like for India?
Right. So I think a more resilient energy strategy will have to start with looking at whatever is within the countries, within our country's boundaries. That means what are all the resources that can be developed. Now that means that energy transition would need to move at the speed of energy security. It takes on the urgency of energy security. What that means is that going into this crisis, we were already seeing a rapid pace of expansion in renewables, from about 5 gigawatts over a decade back to about 50 gigawatts we're expecting annually this year. uh, we do need to see that expansion, but that expansion being complemented by storage. So even if we're looking in renewables, renewables is now having a new challenge, which is of AI, which is going to be a structural challenge. And with that structural challenge, we will need more battery storage capacity, more pumped hydro, which is way more than the less than 2 gigawatt hours that we have currently. And that is where, in the paper, we argue for a comprehensive energy storage policy which goes across electrons and across molecules, which sees literally, by end use sector, what is the supply position, what are the stocks available, and it'll be a stocks and flows exercise both. So that'll have to be taken literally for aviation fuel, for LPG. So really a product level mindset has to come in from a more, what is the crude storage capacity. And I think one of the what the crisis has also shown is that we need to look at gas storage as well more deeply, beyond what is there in LNG storage tanks and beyond what is there in certain pilots which have been undertaken on a very selective basis. So I think it needs to have a much more coordinated view. Now, that said, I think one of the encouraging signs was that there were transitions happening from LPG to natural gas within the crisis. So we saw 350 new 1,000 new registrations of new gas connections, which were waiting to be connected. But because of the LPG crisis, that was that final trigger, which did make that happen, and they were ready to be connected. I think we will also see more push towards things like coal gasification, battery storage, nuclear. We will also see carbon capture, utilization storage systems being incentivized. And I think going into this crisis, the budget just a few weeks before the crisis unfolded had already made significant capital allocations towards it, in the range of 800 to 900 percentage point increases from the prior year. So I think those are all great signs, but a lot more holistic thinking, and something which my co-authors also mentioned. My co-author Dr. Rajiv Lala, he talked about how Indian NOCs have to probably move more from a faith in supplier strategy to more of a stake in supplier strategy. And my other co-author Pulkit Agarwal also talked about how more flexibility in contracts has to be looked at. And something, I think Dr. Atul Arya always reminds us is that never waste a crisis, because, I think what happens in a crisis, the dynamic of a crisis is that there is a collapse, there's a push in the system to collapse and compress timelines. So short, medium term, long term doesn't mean anything if it's important for long term energy security. So I think that is where we need to ride that wave of this crisis.
Beyond energy, we are also seeing changes in industrial and trade policy. Deepa, so how is India balancing self sufficiency with global integration?
This is a very important question, Aries. And before I answer the how, I'd just like to ground it in a couple of facts, in a couple of sort of contextual points for India. The first thing is this industrial and trade policy pivot kind of did start before this conflict. It started well for domestic reasons as well, because the makeup of the Indian economy and the balance of agriculture, manufacturing, and services is such that, like, India is hoping that manufacturing and services in the coming decades picks up a lot more weight, shared weight, than it is right now. That's the first thing. The second thing is to Gauri's point itself, right? Like, trade policy itself has changed so much. Energy policy is also trade policy. Services policy is also industrial policy. There's a kind of a holistic way of looking at these things, which are also driving some of India's policy choices domestically, foreign policy platforms internationally. And the third is just the point of how does India reorient administratively within the country to be able to meet some of these goals. Everything that Gauri mentioned and everything that we've spoken about is a multi ministerial, multi geography kind of approach. So there's really a matrix that India is trying to or having to have to build here to be able to answer these questions. Now, coming to the how is India trying to do this, is first is that India is looking at it at both sides of the same coin. Like, self-sufficiency is one side of the coin, and building those strategic sort of options and building its kind of like diversification strategy is the other side of that coin. And given how much reticence India had for foreign trade agreements, say a few years ago, even before in the earlier terms of this very government, it's actually changed in this term in the last few years. So one of the most pronounced ways in which we are seeing India do something like this, affect its trade policy and industrial policy, is through signing and is through negotiations of free trade agreements that India has started, concluded, or is in the progress stage with multiple economic blocks, trading blocks, and countries' economies of the world. We've seen them come through with the UK, we've seen them come through with EU, with Oman last year, and more are likely to come through in the next 1 to 2 years. So FTAs has kind of become a very important tool for India to be able to do this. But what is included in the FDAs now is not just at what duty is India importing a good or at what duty is India exporting a good. It now talks about environmental standards, which feeds into the energy policy. With EU, it also looks at exemptions for things like CBAM, so that India is able to manufacture domestically and continue sort of building its industrial policy in a way that does not contradict energy policy elsewhere. It's also services oriented because, like I was saying, more than 38% of India's remittances come from the Gulf region. So they're trying to ensure that that also remains diversified. So that is one sort of element of FTAs and how India is trying to do that. The other, and we've seen it, it's kind of become the linchpin of industrial policies, production linked incentive services, is where in the sectors in which India is basically, something that like we studied it in a very like import substitution, export promotion kind of framework. It's a much more developed and enhanced version of that framework, where basically India is saying, come manufacture in India, we give you a set of subsidies. And they want to do them in sectors especially like smartphones, semiconductors, solar PV, and auto. So these are to name a few. There are of course a lot more, but we're seeing that they're building these in strategic sectors where India feels you really need that balance between having domestic options, having foreign options, but then also trying to become more of an exporter. So how do you move from self-sufficiency at one end of the spectrum to become deeply integrated in sort of the environment, the global environment, a little more at the other end of the spectrum? So it's very likely that this policy path and this policy platform stays for India, at least while we're looking at political continuity going forward. And the one last thing I'd say, and which, somewhere in my questions that I missed saying, but it's an important indicator, is the level of foreign investment in India and the challenge that either we're facing with FPIs and how FTAs are resolving for that as well. In fact, Gauri will remember from the India Forward roundtable that we were at in May. One of the discussions that did came through was like how FTAs are also a channel for FDI. So now the FTAs now in fact have investment commitments in them. So we're likely to see more investment commitments also included in FTAs going forward, which may start addressing some of the challenges that we've spoken about so far, Aries.
Great. And now we are coming to the final question for the episode, which is for Gauri. So if we take a step back, so to what extent India will be able to capitalize on this moment to transform itself further?
Great question to end this lovely podcast with. So I think, this crisis really provides an opportunity as a catalyst to speed up the process, speed up whatever was left on the reform agenda, and needed sort of those connective tissue to make things happen. It also acts as a mirror in terms of which are the areas where a deeper push, a wider look is needed. And in our paper, we do argue for five immediate areas of action which work across policy, operators, and regulation, and works across the energy value chain. And they are number one, supply security. So, rapidly increasing supply of all secure domestic supply sources and really not holding back, whether it's oil and gas production, biofuels, biogas, renewables, even geothermal, nuclear power. I will say that. Just recently, last week, there was some excitement around Oil India having some find of gas, potential for gas discovery in the Andaman Basin. So that is credit to the Samudra Manthan program, which the government has launched to deepen India's exploration push. Diversity of supplies, so securing access to oil and gas supplies, less affected by supply routes and geopolitics. And Deepa had mentioned this earlier, how we've gone, to Australia, Latin America, Argentina is also part of the oil supply mix today, and internationalization of Indian NOCs to get that stake in supplier, which my colleague Rajiv has written about in the paper. Flexibility for resilience to improve flexibility of contracts, refining configurations, expanding shipping access, and enhancing the demand response, which Pulkit has talked about in the paper. And deepening the upstream push, really again going back to taking more stake in international supplies, but also making sure every drop of hydrocarbon is explored, developed, and produced in India. And finally, as what I argue in the paper for is a comprehensive energy storage policy for reliability. If you look at many sectors in the economy, we are looking at backup options, right? Whether you look at, backup infrastructure, backup. So, what is the backup? I think that backup question has to be a question of markets and policy through a comprehensive energy storage view across electrons, across molecules, but grounded in an understanding of end use. Like, what is the amount required for aviation? What is the amount required for power? What is the amount required for transport? So it's sort of the next level of reform and the next level of understanding on what will resilience really be.
Thank you, Gauri, and thank you, Deepa, for helping us frame what really matters as this plays out. And the key message today is the current shock is forcing India to rethink how it grows, how it secures energy, and how it positions itself in a more fragmented global economy. And in that sense, this may not be just about a test of resilience. It could be a catalyst for transformation. If you would like to dive deeper into our research and our blog post, visit spglobal.com and explore our Look Forward Council resources. You can also connect with Deepa and Gauri on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening to the Look Forward podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. And we'll see you next time.